orphan boy, sings on the street for money. A billionaire in the crowd changes his life. The cold wind howled through the streets as a young boy stood on the sidewalk, his arms wrapped around himself for warmth. Leo, just 10 years old, took a shaky breath and started singing. His voice was soft but beautiful, carrying through the bustling city street. But no one stopped. People rushed past him, too busy to care. A street vendor scowled at him. "Go away, kid. You're scaring off my customers." Leo's stomach growled, but he kept singing, because if he didn't make enough money tonight, he wouldn't eat. Then, someone stopped. A man in a luxury suit, standing in the shadows, watching him closely. Leo didn't know it yet. But that man was about to change his life forever. The city never slowed down. Cars honked, people rushed by, and neon signs flickered advertising luxury stores and expensive restaurants. But for Leo, the city was just another place that didn't care if he survived. Leo was 10 years old, an orphan, alone in the world. He had no home, no family, no warm meals waiting for him. The streets were his home, the alleys, his shelter. But Leo had one thing that no one could take away from him: his voice. It was pure, emotional, the kind of voice that could make people stop and listen, if only they did. Leo's fingers were numb from the cold. He sang on the same street corner every night, hoping for a few coins, a little kindness. But most people, they just walked past. Some glanced at him with pity, others with disgust, and some, they didn't even see him at all. A street vendor across from him sighed in annoyance. "Get lost, kid," the man growled. "People don't come here to listen to beggars." Leo flinched but didn't move, because if he left now, he wouldn't eat tonight. He took a deep breath and kept singing. His voice was soft but powerful, carrying a sadness that even the rushing crowd couldn't ignore. And finally, someone noticed. A tall man, dressed in an expensive suit, stood a few feet away. He had been listening the whole time. But unlike the others, he didn't walk away. He didn't rush past. He just watched. His sharp blue eyes studied the boy closely, as if trying to understand something. His name, Ethan Blake, a billionaire, a man who had built an empire. And tonight, he was about to change Leo's life forever. Leo's voice trembled as he reached the final notes of his song. His stomach was empty, his body frozen, but he kept singing. Because if he stopped, he wouldn't eat tonight. Coins clinked into his small tin can, but barely enough for a piece of bread. And then, laughter. A group of teenagers walked by, pointing at him. "Look at this kid. Thinks he's a superstar," one of them sneered. "Sing for us, little beggar," another mocked, clapping his hands. Leo's face burned, but he didn't stop. He had heard it all before. But no matter how much they laughed, his voice was all he had. The street vendor across from him sighed in frustration. "I told you to get lost, boy," he barked, stepping toward him. "You scare off customers with your sad little songs." Leo shrank back, gripping his tin can. The man kicked it over, sending the few coins scattering onto the sidewalk. "No one wants to hear you." Tears burned behind Leo's eyes, but he still didn't move, because where else could he go? Then, a voice cut through the chaos. "Enough!" Everyone froze. Leo's heart pounded as he looked up. The well-dressed man from the crowd had stepped forward. Ethan Blake, the billionaire. But Leo didn't know that yet. Ethan ignored the street vendor and focused on Leo. "Where did you learn to sing like that?" he asked. Leo hesitated. No one had ever asked him that before. "Nowhere," he said quietly. "I just sing." Ethan studied him for a moment. Then he reached into his wallet and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He placed it in Leo's hand. Leo's eyes widened. He had never held so much money in his life. The street vendor's mouth fell open. The teenagers who had mocked Leo, they stared in disbelief. But Ethan wasn't done. "Sing one more time," he said, his voice gentle but firm. Leo blinked. "What?" Ethan smiled. "Sing for me, kid." Leo's hands trembled as he looked down at the money. Was this a trick? A test? But something about Ethan's calm gaze made him believe. So he took a deep breath, and he sang. This time, he didn't care about the crowd. He didn't care about the street vendor. He didn't care about the laughter. He just let his voice soar, and this time, people finally stopped to listen. The street fell silent as Leo's voice filled the air. His song wasn't just words and notes, it was a story of pain, of loneliness, a story of a boy who had nothing but his voice. People who had once ignored him now stopped in their tracks. Even the cruel teenagers who had laughed at him earlier stood frozen, their expressions shifting from mockery to guilt. The street vendor, who had tried to chase him away, was now watching with wide eyes. And Ethan Blake? He was smiling. As Leo finished his song, the world around him changed. For the first time in his life, people clapped. Not just one or two. The entire sidewalk erupted in applause. A woman reached into her purse, dropping a $20 bill into his can. A man in a business suit handed him another $50. More and more people came forward, dropping money, nodding in admiration. Leo's chest tightened. This wasn't just money. This was the first time he had been seen. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Ethan stepped forward again. "You're talented, kid." Leo wiped at his eyes, still in shock. "Thanks, sir." Ethan crouched down to his level. "How long have you been out here?" Leo hesitated, then whispered, "Since I was 7." Ethan's jaw tightened. 7. A child, surviving on the streets alone for 3 years. He exhaled deeply, then spoke. "What if I told you this doesn't have to be your life?" Leo blinked. "What?" Ethan pulled out a business card and held it out. "Come with me. Let's change your life." Leo's fingers shook as he took the card. It had a company name on it. A name he had seen on billboards before. Ethan Blake wasn't just a rich guy. He was one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. Leo's heart pounded. Was this real? Could he trust him? He had spent years learning that kindness was a lie, that people always took more than they gave. "Why would you help me?" Leo asked, his voice barely a whisper. Ethan smiled, "Because once upon a time, I was you." Leo froze. Ethan's expression softened. "I grew up with nothing too." He looked around at the city. "I was an orphan, no home, no family, just trying to survive." Leo stared, unable to believe it. Ethan Blake, a billionaire, had once been like him? "One day," Ethan continued, "a stranger took a chance on me, gave me a home, a future. And now?" He patted Leo's shoulder. "I want to do the same for you." Leo's throat tightened. Someone had helped Ethan once, and now he wanted to help him. Ethan pulled off his expensive jacket and draped it over Leo's thin shoulders. For the first time in years, Leo felt warmth. Real warmth. Not just from the fabric, but from hope. Ethan stood. "Come with me." Leo looked down at his tin can, filled with more money than he had ever seen. And then he looked at Ethan's outstretched hand, a hand offering him more than just money, a new life. Leo took a deep breath and made his choice. He reached up and took Ethan's hand. The billionaire smiled. And just like that, Leo's life changed forever. The city lights blurred as Leo sat in the back of Ethan Blake's luxury car. For the first time in his life, he was warm. He looked out the window. watching the streets he had lived on for years disappear behind him. It felt surreal. Just an hour ago, he had been singing for scraps. Now, he was sitting beside a billionaire, a man who had just changed everything. Leo clutched the fabric of the expensive jacket draped over him. It smelled of clean linen and wealth, nothing like the cold streets he was used to. Ethan glanced at him. Hungry? Leo hesitated. A little. Ethan chuckled. I don't believe that. Let's get you something real to eat. The car pulled into a high-end restaurant. Leo felt small as they walked inside. The chandeliers, the white tablecloths, the soft music. It was like a dream. And when the waiter placed a steaming plate of food in front of him, Leo froze, because it had been so long since he had eaten a real meal. As Leo ate, Ethan leaned back. You remind me of myself, he said quietly. Leo paused. You said you were an orphan, too. Ethan nodded. I was. I grew up in foster homes. Some good, some bad. But I never had a real family. His voice grew distant. Then one day, a man saw something in me. He gave me my first job, taught me how to survive in business. Leo swallowed hard. And now, you're a billionaire. Ethan smiled. And now, I want to do for you what he did for me. Leo's chest tightened. No one had ever believed in him before, but Ethan did. And for the first time, Leo allowed himself to believe too. Ethan set down his glass. I'm giving you a choice, Leo. Leo froze. I can take you to a shelter, help you get off the streets, or... Ethan's eyes locked onto his. You can come with me. Train with a vocal coach. Go to school. Build a future for yourself. Leo's breath hitched. A future? For so long, he had only thought about surviving the next day. Now, someone was offering him a chance to dream. Leo's fingers clenched into fists. He knew his answer. I want to go with you. Ethan's smile widened. Then let's get started. And with that, Leo's new life truly began. Years later, the massive stadium was packed with thousands of people. Bright lights illuminated the stage as the crowd roared, chanting one name. Leo! 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 Backstage, a young man took a deep breath. Dressed in a sleek black suit, his once thin frame was now strong. His face, once filled with uncertainty and hunger, now radiated confidence and purpose. He had made it. And tonight, he was about to step onto the biggest stage of his life. Ethan Blake stood beside him, arms crossed, smiling. You ready, kid? Leo let out a slow breath and grinned. More than ever. He turned, staring at his reflection in the mirror. The memory of a shivering boy on the cold streets flashed in his mind. The boy who once sang for scraps. Now, he was about to perform for the world. Leo turned back to Ethan. Thank you for everything. Ethan chuckled. You did the work, kid. I just gave you the chance. Leo nodded. And I'll never waste it. The announcer's voice boomed. Please welcome Leo Williams. The crowd erupted as Leo stepped onto the stage. The blinding lights, the massive sea of people. It was overwhelming. But the moment he stepped up to the microphone, everything else faded away. He closed his eyes and sang, just like he had on the streets. But this time, the whole world was listening. Ethan watched from backstage, arms folded. He had seen this kid go from a starving orphan to a global star. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt at peace. Because once upon a time, someone had believed in him. And now, he had done the same for Leo. This was more than just a success story. It was a legacy. Years later, Leo didn't just become a star. He never forgot where he came from. With Ethan's help, he started a foundation for homeless children, funding shelters, music schools, and support programs, because he knew how it felt to be invisible. And now, He was making sure no other kid felt that way. As he stood on stage, looking out at the crowd, he spoke into the microphone. "Years ago, I was just a boy on the streets singing to survive. I had nothing, no family, no home." He paused, his eyes scanning the audience. "But one man believed in me, and because of him, I'm standing here today." Tears filled his eyes as he smiled at Ethan in the front row. Sometimes, all it takes is one person to change your life. The crowd erupted in applause. And Ethan? He wiped away a tear, because tonight, Leo didn't just sing. He proved that kindness changes everything. Leo Williams once stood on the cold streets singing just to survive. People walked past, ignoring him like he didn't exist. He had nothing, no family, no home, no future. But one man stopped and listened. Ethan Blake saw something in him, something the world had overlooked. He gave him a chance, a choice. And years later, Leo didn't just become a success. He became a voice for those like him. Leo's story isn't just about music. It's about what happens when someone believes in you. Ethan didn't just hand him money. He handed him a future. And in return, Leo used his success to lift others up. He created homes for homeless children, schools for young musicians, because he knew no child should have to fight alone. One small act of kindness can change a life forever. Maybe today you're Leo, waiting for someone to believe in you. Or maybe you're Ethan, in a position to change someone's life. Either way, what you do matters. So now, let's ask you, have you ever been in a moment where kindness changed everything for you? Would you have taken the chance if you were in Leo's place? Let us know in the comments. And if this story inspired you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. For more powerful, life-changing stories like this, hit that subscribe button now. Thank you for watching. And remember, one moment of kindness can create a lifetime of change. Until next time.